Step 26. On Discernment of Thoughts, Passions, and Virtues. Due to the length of this chapter, which is about 30 pages, I'll be dividing this up into 3 different parts. Discernment in beginners is true knowledge of themselves. In intermediate souls, it is a spiritual sense that faultlessly distinguishes what is truly good from what is of nature and opposed to it. And in the perfect, it is the knowledge which they have within by divine illumination, and which can enlighten with its lamp what is dark in others. Or perhaps, generally speaking, discernment is, and is recognized as, the certain understanding of the divine will on all occasions, in every place, and in all matters, and it is only found in those who are pure in heart, and in body, and in mouth. He who has piously destroyed within himself the 3 passions has destroyed the 5 too, but he who has been negligent about the former will not conquer even one passion. Discernment is undefiled conscience and purity of perception. Let no one on seeing or hearing something supernatural in the monastic way of life fall into unbelief out of ignorance. For where the supernatural God dwells, much that is supernatural happens. Every satanic conflict in us comes from these 3 generic causes, from negligence, or from pride, or from the envy of the demons. The first is pitiable, the second is most wretched, but the third is blessed. After God, let us have our conscience as our mentor and rule in all things, so that we may know which way the wind is blowing and set our sails accordingly. In all our actions in which we try to please God, the demons dig 3 pits for us. By the first, they endeavor to prevent any good at all from being done. By the second, after their first defeat, they try to secure that it should not be done according to the will of God. But when these rogues fail in this too, then, standing quietly before our soul, they praise us for living a thoroughly godly life. The first is to be opposed by zeal and fear of death, the second by obedience and humiliation, and the third by unceasing self-condemnation. We shall be faced by toil of this kind until the divine fire enters into our sanctuary, for then our proclivities are rendered powerless. Our God is a fire consuming all fever of lust and movement of passion, every inclination rooted in us, and all blindness and darkness within and without, both visible and spiritual. The demons, on the other hand, produce in us the opposite of what has just been said. For when they take possession of the soul and extinguish the light of the mind, then there is no longer in us poor wretches sobriety or discernment or self-knowledge or shame. But there is indifference, insensitivity, want of discernment, and blindness. What has just been said is known very vividly by those who have abandoned fornication and become chaste, who have curbed their freedom of speech and have changed from shamelessness to self-possession. They know how after the sobering of the mind, after the ending of its blindness, or rather its maiming, they are inwardly ashamed of themselves for what they said and did before when they were living in blindness. If the day in our soul does not draw to evening and grow dark, then the thieves will not come and steal and kill and destroy our soul. Theft is a loss of property. Theft is doing what is not good as if it were good. Theft is unobserved captivity of the soul. The slaying of the soul is the death of the rational mind that has fallen into nefarious deeds. Destruction is despair of oneself, following on breach of the law. Let no one plead his incapacity to fulfill the commandments of the gospel, for there are souls who have gone even beyond the commandments. And you will certainly be convinced of what has been said by him who loved his neighbor more than himself and laid down his life for him, although he had not received this commandment from the Lord. Let those who have been humbled by their passions take courage, for even if they fall into every pit and are trapped in all the snares and suffer all maladies, yet after their restoration to health they become physicians, beacons, lamps, and pilots for all, teaching us the habits of every disease, and from their own personal experience able to rescue those who are about to fall. If some are still dominated by their former bad habits, yet can teach by mere word, let them teach. But they should not have authority as well, for perhaps being put to shame by their own words, they might begin to practice virtue, and there come to pass in them that which I saw in certain men who were stuck in the mud. Bogged down as they were telling passerbys how they had sunk there, explaining this for their salvation, so that they should not fall in the same way. However, for the salvation of others, the all-powerful God delivered them from the mud as well. But if those who are possessed by passions voluntarily plunge into pleasures, let them teach by silence, for Jesus began both to do and to teach. Perilous, truly perilous, is a sea that we humble monks are crossing, a sea in which there are many winds, rocks, whirlpools, pirates, waterspouts, shallows, monsters, and waves. A rock in the soul we may consider to be fierce and sudden anger. A whirlpool is hopelessness which seizes the mind and strives to drag it into the depths of despair. A shallow is ignorance which accepts what is bad as good. A monster is this heavy and savage body. Pirates are the most dangerous servants of vainglory who rifle our cargo and the hard-won earnings of the virtues. A wave is a swollen and burdened stomach which by its greed hands us over to the beast. A waterspout is pride that casts us down from heaven, that carries us up to the sky and then down to the abyss. Those engaged in education know what studies are suitable for beginners, what for the intermediate, and what for the teachers. Let us take sensible precautions not to prolong our study and to stop in the beginner's lessons. For to see an old man going to a children's school is a great disgrace. Here is an excellent alphabet for all.
Блаженні нищі духом, яко тихи царство небесное. Блаженні плачущі, яко ті утешатся.
A good schedule and resolution for the advanced, and evidence of their progress, is absence of vainglory, freedom from anger, good hope, stillness, discernment, firm remembrance of the judgment, compassion, hospitality, moderation in reproof, dispassionate prayer, and lack of avarice. And here is a standard rule and law for those in the flesh who are piously aiming at perfection in spirit and body.
Блаженні чисті серцем, яко ті Бога узрят. Блаженні миротворці, яко ті синови Божии нарекутся. Блаженні изгнані правди ради, яко тихи царство небесное.
We have need of considerable vigilance when the body is sick. The demons, seeing us laid low and temporarily incapable of entering into the struggle with them, owing to our infirmity, try to attack us fiercely at such times. The demon of irritation, sometimes of blasphemy, hovers around those living in the world in time of illness. And the demon of gluttony and fornication attacks those living outside the world if they have an abundance of all necessities. But if they are living in ascetical places bereft of all consolation, then the tyrant of despondency and ingratitude are constantly sitting with them. I noticed that the woof of fornication added to the sufferings of the sick, and during their actual sufferings produced in them movements of the flesh and emissions. And it was astounding to see how the flesh rages and burns with desire amidst violent agonies. And I looked again and saw men lying in bed, who were then and there comforted by divine power, or by a sense of compunction. And by this comfort they warded off the pain, and reached such a frame of mind in which they never wanted to get rid of their sickness. And again I turned and saw those suffering severely, who by illness were delivered from the passions of the soul, as if by some penance. And I glorified him who cleansed clay by clay. A noetic mind is certainly wrapped in noetic perception, since it is both in us and not in us. Let us never cease to seek it. When it makes its appearance, the outward senses of their own accord cease their natural action. Knowing this, as one of the wise said, and thou shalt obtain a perception of the divine. The monastic life, in regards to deeds, words, thoughts, and movements, must be lived with heartfelt perception. Otherwise, it will not be a monastic life, let alone an angelic life. The providence of God is one thing, his help is another, and his protection is another. The mercy of God is another, and his consolation another. Providence is displayed in all nature, help only in the faithful, protection in the faithful who truly have faith, mercy in those who serve God, and consolation in those who love him. Sometimes what serves as medicine for one is poison for another, and sometimes something even given to one and the same person at a suitable time serves as a medicine, but at the wrong time is a poison. I have seen an unskilled physician who, by subjecting to dishonor a sick man who was contrite in spirit, only drove him to despair. And I have seen a skilled physician who operated on an arrogant heart with a knife of dishonor, and drained it of all its evil-smelling pus. I have seen one and the same sick man sometimes drink the medicine of obedience, and move, walk, and not sleep, in order to cleanse his impurity. And sometimes, when the eye of his soul was sick, remain still and silent. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Some, I do not know why, for I have not learned to pry conceitedly into the gifts of God, are by nature, I might say, prone to temperance, or stillness, or purity, or modesty, or meekness, or contrition. But others, although almost their own nature itself resists them in this, to the best of their power force themselves, and though they occasionally suffer defeat, yet, as men struggling with nature, they are, in my opinion, higher than the former. Do not boast, man, of the wealth you have obtained without labor, for the bestower, foreseeing your great hurt and infirmity and ruin, at least saves you to some extent by those unmerited gifts. Instruction in childhood, education, and studies either help or hinder us in virtue and in the monastic way of life when we come of age. Angels are a light for monks, and the monastic life is a light for all men. Therefore, let monks strive to become a good example in everything, giving no occasion for stumbling in anything in all their works and words. For if the light becomes darkness, how much darker will it be that darkness, that is, those living in the world? If you will listen to me, you who are willing to do so, it is better for us not to diversify ourselves and divide up our poor soul in doing battle with thousands and tens of thousands of 10,000s of enemies. For it is not in our power to comprehend or even to discover all their hosts. With the help of the Holy Trinity, let us battle with 3 against 3. Otherwise, we shall make much toil for ourselves. If he who turneth the sea into dry land really abides in us, then our Israel too, that is, the mind that beholds God, will certainly cross the sea untossed, and will see the Egyptians sunk in the waters of tears. But if he has not yet made his abode in us, who will stand the roaring of the waves of this sea, that is, of our flesh? If through our activity God arises in us, his enemies will be scattered, and if we draw near to him by divine vision, those who hate him will flee from before his face and ours. Let us try to learn divine truth more by toil and sweat than by mere word, for at the time of our departure it is not words but deeds that will have to be shown. Those who hear of treasure hidden in a certain place seek it, and having discovered it, take trouble to keep what they have found. but those who get rich without trouble readily squander their possessions. It is difficult to overcome former bad habits, and those who keep adding on further new ones to them either fall into despair or get no benefit at all from obedience. But I know that to God all things are possible, and to him nothing is impossible. Certain people ask me a question difficult to solve and which is beyond the powers of anyone like me, and it is not to be found in any of the books that have reached me. For they said, "What are the particular offspring of the 8 deadly sins? Or which of the 3 chief sins is the father of the other 5 minor sins?" But by pleasing praiseworthy ignorance as regards to this difficulty, I learned from the holy men the following. The mother of lust is gluttony, and the mother of despondency is vainglory. Sorrow and also anger are the offspring of those 3, i.e., cupidity, sensuality, ambition, and the mother of pride is vainglory. In reply to this statement of those ever memorable fathers, I began again earnestly to ask them to tell me about the pedigree of the 8 sins, which exactly are born from which, and these dispassionate men kindly instructed me, saying, "The irrational passions have no order or reason, but they have every sort of disorder and every kind of chaos." And the blessed fathers confirmed this by convincing examples and supplied many proofs, some of which are included in the present chapter, that by them as regards to the rest we may be enlightened. The sort of thing I mean is this. Untimely jesting is sometimes born of lust, and sometimes of vainglory, when a man impiously puts on a pious air, and sometimes, too, of luxury. Much sleep is born sometimes of luxury, and sometimes of fasting when those who fast are proud of it, and sometimes of despondency, and sometimes from nature. Talkativeness is born sometimes of gluttony, and sometimes of vainglory. Despondency is born sometimes of luxury, and sometimes of the lack of fear of God. Blasphemy is properly the offspring of pride, but it is often born of condemnation of our neighbor for the same thing, or of excessive envy of the demons. Hardness of heart sometimes comes from overeating, often from insensitivity and attachment, and again attachment comes sometimes from lust, or from avarice, or from gluttony, or from vainglory, and from many other causes. Guile is born of conceit and anger. Hypocrisy comes from self-satisfaction and willfulness. All the contrary virtues are born of parents contrary to these. But without enlarging on the subject, for I should not have the time if I were to inquire into them all one by one, I will merely say that for all the passions mentioned above, the remedy is humility. Those who have obtained that virtue have overcome all. The mother of all vices is pleasure and guile. He who has them within him will not see the Lord, and abstinence from the first will bring but little benefit without abstinence from the second. As an example of the fear of God, let us take the fear that we feel in the presence of rulers and wild beasts. And as an example of desire for God, let carnal love serve as a model for you. There is nothing against taking examples of the virtues from what is contrary. The present generation is seriously corrupt, and all full of pride and hypocrisy. In bodily labors, it perhaps reaches the level of our ancient fathers, but it is not graced with their gifts, though I think nature never had such need of spiritual gifts as now. And we have received our due. For God is manifested not in labors, but in simplicity and humility. And if the power of the Lord is made perfect in weakness, the Lord will certainly not reject a humble worker. When we see one of our athletes in Christ in bodily suffering and infirmity, let us not maliciously seek to learn the explanation of his illness, but rather, with simple and genuine love, let us try to heal him as though he were a part of our own body, and as a fellow warrior wounded in the fray. Sickness is sometimes for the cleansing of sins, and sometimes to humble our mind. When our good and all-gracious Lord and Master sees people too lazy in their exercises, he lays their flesh low with sickness, and asceticism with less toil, and sometimes it also cleanses the soul from evil thoughts or passions. All that happens to us, seen or unseen, can be taken by us in a good or a passionate or some middle disposition. I saw 3 brethren punished. One was angry, one was without grief, but the third reaped the fruit of great joy. I have seen farmers who were casting the same seeds on the earth, yet each had its own special purpose. One was thinking of paying his debts, another wanted to get rich, another wished to honor the Lord with his gifts, another's aim was to get praise for his good work from the passers-by on the way of life. Another desired to annoy his neighbor who was envious of him, and another did not want to be reproached by people for idleness. Here are the names of those seeds cast to the earth by the farmers: fasting, vigil, alms, services, and the like. Let our brethren in the Lord carefully test their intentions. In drawing water from a well, sometimes without noticing it, we bring up a frog with the water, and so in acquiring the virtues we often get involved with the vices that are imperceptibly entwined with them. The kind of thing I mean is that gluttony is entangled with hospitality, lust with love, cunning with discernment, malice with thoughtfulness, duplicity, procrastination, laziness, contradiction, willfulness, and disobedience with meekness, contempt of instruction with silence, conceit with joy, indolence with hope, harsh judgment with love again, despondency and sloth with stillness, acerbity with chastity, familiarity with humility, and behind them all is a general salve, or rather poison, follows vainglory. We should not be distressed if, asking the Lord for something, we remain for a time unheard. It would have pleased the Lord if all men in a single moment had become dispassionate. However, his foreknowledge told him that this would not be for their good. All who ask and do not obtain their requests from God are denied for one of the following reasons: because they ask at the wrong time, or because they ask unworthily or vaingloriously, or because if they received, they would become conceited, or finally, because they would become negligent after obtaining their request. No one, I think, would doubt that the demons and passions leave the soul either for a time or entirely, but few know the reasons of why they go away from us. Some of the faithful, and even of the unfaithful, have been deserted by all the passions except one, and that one has been left as a paramount evil which fully takes the place of all the others, for it is so harmful it can even cast down from heaven. The material of the passions is destroyed when consumed by divine fire, and while this material is being uprooted and the soul purified, the passions all retire. That is, if a man does not attract them again by worldly habits or indolence. Demons leave us on their own accord so as to lead us to carelessness, and then suddenly carry off our wretched soul. I know another way in which these beasts slink off. They depart after the soul has thoroughly acquired the habits of vice, and is its own betrayer and enemy. Infants are an example of what has been said, for, when weaned from their mother's breasts, from long-standing habit they suck their fingers. I know also of a 5th kind of spiritual dispassion which comes from great simplicity and praiseworthy innocence. For on such people, help is justly bestowed by God, who saves the upright of heart and imperceptibly rids them of all vice, just as infants, when undressed, are quite unaware of it. Vice or passion is not originally planted in nature, for God is not the creator of the passions. But there are in us many natural virtues from him, among which are certainly the following: mercy, for even the pagans are compassionate; love, for even dumb animals often weep at the loss of one another; faith, for we all give birth to it of ourselves; hope, for we lend and sail and sow, looking to the gain. So if, as has been shown, love is the natural virtue in us, and is the bond and fulfillment of the law, then it follows that the virtues are not far from nature, and those who plead their inability to practice them ought to be ashamed. Above nature are chastity, freedom from anger, humility, prayer, vigil, fasting, constant compunction. Some of them men teach us, others angels, and of the others the teacher and giver is God the Word himself. When confronted by evils, we should choose the least. For instance, It often happens that we are standing at prayer and brothers come to us, and we have to do one of two things, either to stop praying or to grieve the brother by leaving him without an answer. Love is greater than prayer, because prayer is a particular virtue, but love embraces all the virtues. Once long ago, when I was still young, I came to a town or village, and while sitting at table, I was attacked by thoughts of gluttony and vainglory, both at once. Fearing the offspring of gluttony, I decided that it was better to yield to vainglory, for I knew that in the young, the demon of gluttony often conquers the demon of vainglory. And this is not surprising. In people of the world, the root of all evil is love of money, but in monks it is gluttony. Often divine providence leaves certain slight passions in spiritual people, so that by unsparingly condemning themselves for such trifling defects, they may obtain that wealth of humility which none can steal. It is impossible for those who have not first lived in obedience to obtain humility, for everyone who has learned an art on his own fancies himself. The Fathers state that the active life consists in two virtues of the most general kind, fasting and obedience. And rightly, for the first destroys sensuality, and the other reinforces this destruction with humility. That is why mourning also has a double power, for it destroys sin and produces humility. To the pious, it is natural to give to everyone who asks, and to the more pious, to give even to him who does not ask. But not to demand a thing back from the person who took it, especially when they have a chance, is a characteristic perhaps only of the dispassionate. In every passion, and also in the virtues, let us critically examine ourselves. Where are we? At the beginning, or in the middle, or at the end? All the attacks which we suffer from the demons come from these three causes, from sensuality, or from pride, or from the envy of the demons. The last are blessed, the middle are very pitiful, but the first are failures till the end. There is a certain feeling, or rather habit, called endurance of hardship. He who possesses it will never be cowardly nor avoid labor. Upheld by this glorious virtue, the souls of the martyrs easily despised their tortures. The guarding of the thoughts is one thing, and the custody of the mind is another. As far as the east is from the west, so much higher is the latter than the former, and it is more laborious. It is one thing to pray for deliverance from bad thoughts, another to contradict them, and another to despise and disregard them. Of the first way he bears testimony who said, O God, be attentive unto helping me. The second, he who said, So shall I give an answer unto those who reproach me. And again, Thou hast made us a gainsaying among our neighbors. Of the third, the witness is the psalmist. I was dumb and opened not my mouth, and I set a guard for my mouth when the sinners stood up against me. And again, the proud have transgressed exceedingly, but from thy divine vision have I not declined. He who stands on the middle step will often make use of the first of these means through being taken unawares, but he who stands on the first step is not in a position to ward off his enemies by the second means, and he who has reached the third step spurns the demons altogether. Naturally, it is impossible for a bodiless being to be confined by a body, but for a person who has God, everything is possible. Just as those whose sense of smell is healthy can tell who has hidden perfumes, so the pure soul can recognize in others both the fragrance which he himself has attained from God and the stench from which he has been freed, though this is imperceptible to others. It is impossible for all to become dispassionate, but it is not impossible for all to be saved and reconciled to God. Take care that you are not mastered by Philistines, those thoughts which urge you to be inquisitive about the ineffable judgments of divine providence, or the visions that people have which secretly suggest that the Lord is partial, for they are the offspring of self-esteem and are known as such. There is a demon of avarice which often apes humility, and there is a demon of vainglory, and one of sensuality too, which both urge to almsgiving. However, if we are clear of them both, we should not stint our deeds of mercy wherever we are. Some have said that demons work against demons, but I know that they all seek our destruction. Our own strong desire and intention, with God's cooperation, precede every spiritual labor, both visible and mental. For if the first had not paved the way, the second is apt not to follow. If there is a time for everything under heaven, as Ecclesiastes says, and by the word everything must be understood what concerns our holy life, then, if you please, let us look into it, and let us seek to do each time what is proper for that occasion. For it is certain that, for those who enter the lists, there is a time for dispassion and a time for passion. I say this for the combatants who are serving their apprenticeship. There is a time for tears and a time for hardness of heart. There is a time for obedience, and there is a time to command. There is a time to fast and a time to partake. There is a time for battle with our enemy, the body, and a time when the fire is dead. A time of storm in the soul, and a time of calm in the mind. A time for heartfelt sorrow, and a time for spiritual joy. A time for teaching, and a time for listening. A time of pollutions, perhaps on account of deceit, and a time for cleansing by humility. A time for struggle, and a time for safe relaxation. A time for stillness, and a time for undistracted distraction. A time for unceasing prayer, and a time for sincere service. So let us not be deceived by proud zeal, and seek prematurely what will come in its own good time. That is, we should not seek in winter what comes in summer, or at seed time what comes in harvest. Because there is a time to sow labors, and there is a time to reap the unspeakable gifts of grace. Otherwise, we should not receive even in season what is proper to that season.